Okay, so this is the story that I always point to prove that it isn't the costumes and the effects that ruin the web planet for me. Hello, my name's Chris, what's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at, well, let's just get into it. I think this story may be your most perfect example of how disparate intention and execution can sometimes be. And that isn't to say that all of the execution here sucks a big one, because it doesn't. What we've got here is one of the very best ideas for a Doctor Who story yet, combined with some very decent performances and a very well put together script. There is really only one element of this story's execution which lets it down, but unfortunately, yes, it is a big one, which is why it gets so talked about, and it can tarnish this story's reputation when it does. Because when I say it's a big one, it's brontosaurus sized, actually. It isn't that I can't see past a bad effect, and believe me, if I couldn't see past the titular dinosaurs, then this story would not emerge from this review very well at all. But I can see all that's good about it. It's just that it relies so heavily on these dinosaurs that it's as if it's daring me not to look past them. The fact of the matter is that it relies on the dinosaurs more than it needs to. Quite simply, it's not that there are bad dinosaurs, it's that there are too many bad dinosaurs for too long a time. It really would have been prudent to be sparing in their depiction of them, considering they're very clearly the story's most obvious weakness. Even at the time, never mind flinging accusations of spoiled 21st century eyes, they are a bit lacking. Whenever they show up, they threaten to remove you from a really engaging plot, and so as little of them as possible, when it realised that's how they were going to look, would have been the way to go. A couple of shots to establish them here and there, for sure, but, you know, lingering shots of them having a cuddle, fight. No, there's really no need. The production team just bit off way more than they could chew with them, and while there is a really solid story behind them, you can't ignore them. I know that some people will point to it and be like, oh, well, it's not the most important thing about Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And they're right, it isn't. Invasion of the Dinosaurs isn't just about the dinosaurs. And it's a really good story behind them. The dinosaurs are a part of this. They need to be spoken about, and they're not very good. This story, without them, would have been perfect. As it is, it does have a bit of a drag factor. A bit of a drag factor. Not a massive one. This isn't about not being able to see past a bad effect, because they're not just a bad effect, they are such a large part of the story that, like I said, they cannot be ignored when it comes to evaluating them. When it comes to evaluating the story, they play a part in it, because look, it's not called Ruse of the Eggheads, is it? But I don't find them heinous purely because of their poor realisation. How else are the team going to realise dinosaurs on the budget that they have? Other than not making a story with dinosaurs in it, of course. But no, their biggest crime is that they degrade from a really very good story. One which has the potential to be Hulk's best. And here's the thing for me when it comes to evaluating Invasion of the Dinosaurs. Yes, Bronte and his mates do knock off a few goodwill points. How can they not? It's just that Hulk's excellent script, the really engaging plot, the fantastically put together story, and the excellent performances that bring it to life mean that there's enough goodwill points for this one to emerge, despite what this video may have suggested up until this point, emerge as an excellent Doctor Who story. Because while I still can't pretend that the dinosaurs are anything other than lacking, the story is so good that it becomes a question of caring about how lacking those dinosaurs are. And on this viewing, I cared about how lacking the dinosaurs were less than ever before. Separating this into a binary affair of excellent story and dreadful effects would suggest it evens out as average, which is to simplify matters somewhat. I consider the story itself above par, and the execution of it seriously below par. But that would average out in a score which doesn't really do justice to how I feel about either aspect. And it also doesn't take into account how one affects the other. So is the quality of the effects so dreadful as to irreversibly tarnish the story? Or is the quality of the story so good as to render the quality of the effects immaterial? And I did used to find those big beasties really hard to overcome. They're so prominent, that I don't really blame anybody for not being able to see past them. But over time I have mellowed. This story is excellent despite them. The good stuff on display is brilliant stuff. The opening in deserted London is spooky and atmospheric. In fact, I think it's even better than when Danny Boyle tried it 30 years later. It's a hell of an opening to have the Doctor and Sarah return to somewhere which is ostensibly familiar, and yet it's as alien as anywhere else we've been in the show. It calls to mind the handling of the contemporary-ish London Underground in The Web of Fear. Removing us from the picture shows just how alien our world can be. It leads to some really lovely stuff, continuing this lightness of touch that Pertwee is able to tap into. The Doctor sort of like playing silly buggers when having his photograph taken under martial law is excellent. It feels like a nice continuation from his demeanour in the last story, and once again shows a Doctor who is more about the fun than he has been previously. And it also helps to strengthen his friendship with Sarah as well, and by the end of this story they're getting on like a house on fire. It helps that Hulk excels at the idea of military law being imposed, which is something that you can take from his previous work he would find utterly abhorrent. And there's the suggestion that the officer who the Doctor and Sarah are taken to seems to be enjoying having this power over people, which to me is just as unsettling as the empty exteriors. Throughout Hulk's contributions to the Pertwee era, it is obvious that he has a predilection for making the point that in any conflict there are heroes and villains on either side. This is overt in much of his output, further enhanced by either side being alien from the other. Now, why this story is interesting and why I think it might even be his most accomplished is that both sides here are human. There is no alien interference, and the monsters this time, the dinosaurs, are here because of human meddling. What this does is narrow the focus when it comes to sketching the heroes and villains. For example, there was no danger in Doctor Who and the Silurians of Dr. Lawrence turning out to be a Silurian. Yet the closest we got was Fulton Mackay seeing the Silurians behind humanity's back. But with both sides being human here, Hulk is able to sketch both sides in murkier shades of grey than he normally would, and considering that's something he likes to do, it feels like he is in his element with this one. There are understandable motivations on both sides, and while villainy does root itself in some of the characters, a lot of it comes from blinkered views rather than pure evil, and that's exactly how Hulk likes to sketch his heroes and villains. The most overt example of this he's done on Doctor Who so far is here, with Mike Yates turning out to be a traitor. As you'll know, I'm not a huge fan of Mike Yates, and a lot of that, I've now realised, is as much down to Richard Franklin's performance as him as it is the character himself. And this is brought further home here because Mike Yates works very well in this story, except, shock horror, so does Franklin. Whether he's always suited to being a slippery snake or his being slightly treacherous is just a good retroactive explanation for my aversion to him so far, that's up for discussion, but I can't deny that Franklin has risen to the challenge this story presents him far better than I thought he'd be capable of. Yates works in this story, and whatever I thought of him previously, it is quite an audacious thing to do with one of the regular cast. And if any of them are going to turn out to be a traitor, then I suppose, Mike's the one to do it with. But just imagine for a second if it had been Benton. Or even the Brig. Yates has been part of that family, so it's the same sort of thing. It's just that, and maybe I'm only speaking for myself here, but we like Benton and the Brig more than we do Yates. If Benton had turned out to be the one working in cahoots with the villains, conceptually, it'd be on an even keel. It's just that emotionally, it'd be more of a shock. In the end, though, it had to be Mike. The Brigadier needs to be sided with the Doctor, and Benton, well, is just too loyal. He proves it in this story when he allows the Doctor to lay him out in order to escape and put a stop to it all. He directly disobeys Lethbridge Stewart, who was acting under orders himself anyway, because of his faith in the Doctor. We could point to this as proof that nobody at UNIT ever truly liked Mike either, but I feel like that's by the by. The caper that the villains have implemented is what makes this story, in my opinion, such a good idea on paper. It's sort of nearly almost understandable in theory, but undeniably barbaric in practice. Wanting to reset the Earth to a better time is a wonderful notion, but it does get sticky when it comes to who decides which time was the better time. Duping those sympathetic to the idea that they're just leaving Earth behind when actually you're going to temporarily murder everyone that's left behind is what tips this over into pure villainy. But it does make for a very engaging plot. Even knowing how it plays out,
we left Earth 3 months ago.
is an absolutely terrific cliffhanger, and watching this story with no idea how it will resolve itself is an experience I'll only ever have that once, and it was a long time ago, but it's an indelible one which I'm taken back to every time I revisit it. It's also why I can never ever dislike Invasion of the Dinosaurs, but while I don't dwell on them anymore as much as I used to, I do understand despairing quite so much at those dinosaurs. A weaker story with those dinosaurs would generate a shrug at most, but a story this good with such a notable deficiency only makes that deficiency stand out all the more. The web planet didn't grip me this time, and it's very easy for people to accuse me of not being able to see past the obvious. But if I find a story good enough, I absolutely can. And this time I didn't find the web planet engaging beyond the obvious. So yeah, it therefore makes it harder to see past the obvious, to forgive the obvious, because there's very little hiding behind it. Here though, there is so much going on behind those dinosaurs that it becomes impossible to write it all off just because of those dinosaurs. I know they're in the title, but I'll say it again. Those dinosaurs, they're surplus to requirements. We really don't need them as much as we have them. And if that's the case, then they can't harm this story as much as is sometimes made out. So with all of this happening, and his propensity for switching off to varying degrees when unexcited by the material, does any of this affect Jon Pertwee? Not one jot. The little pterodactyl is another lamentable effect, but he doesn't half act his socks off to sell it. Far better than wrestling the Nestine or a telephone flex. This commitment further endears me to him, and I come to the conclusion that while he did hit the ground running when he took over in terms of confidence, his best work as the Doctor actually comes towards the end of his tenure. Elizabeth Sladen builds on her debut and continues, in my opinion, to be excellent.
And what shall I tell the Doctor?
Well, tell him... Tell him I've gone out to play.
It's this sort of pluck that I wish Jo had been given as soon as she'd joined the show. Coming hot on the heels of the sublime The Time Warrior, the aesthetics of Invasion of the Dinosaurs do threaten to deliver a crushing blow to somebody who was rather buoyed up by that excellent opening to season 11, following being really downbeat, having had to say goodbye to the Master and Jo. But it turns out that threat was empty. Squint past the dinosaurs, this is incredibly strong stuff. You cannot fault the ambition here, and as such, I really don't think the story suffers as a result either. Maybe a little. I mean, you are left with the sense that maybe they should have known their limitations, and I do come away sort of like scratching my head at the naivety of them. But as a wound to the story, 'tis but a scratch. Oh, and the Whomobile manages to be dafter than Bessie. 365 episodes in, and as we go into Pertwee's final 3 stories, I can safely say this is definitively the most I've ever enjoyed his era. And this so happens to be the most I've ever enjoyed Invasion of the Dinosaurs. There's actually quite a lot to choose from, but I think I might go for the Doctor not taking martial law and his arrest very seriously at all. Well, it's the dinosaurs, isn't it? I mean, obviously it is, but more specifically, the length of time spent on watching them nuzzle each other in a terrifying fight. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this glimpse at a golden age, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a like and share it around. And what do you think of this one? Are the dinosaurs impossible to look past and enjoy this story, or is this one of the very best Doctor Who stories that doesn't get enough love because of the perceived flaws? Is the show to be commended for its ambition here, or should they know full well what they could and couldn't achieve? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for the latest return of the Daleks. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you on Exelon.